show you how you can use the tools on quiltnotes.com to find the fabric requirements for almost any type of patchwork quilt you can design. Today we'll be using this unnamed block as a demonstration. This block is done in two fabrics, a light and a dark, and it's just to show the placement of the light and dark fabrics. For variety, use several different fabrics or light and dark scraps to make it more interesting. We'll be talking about grids and finding the block size using the tools on quiltnotes.com. In our example, this block is a 3x3 grid. Some popular block finished sizes for 3x3 grids are 9-inch, 12-inch, and 15 inches. Under the Calculators tab at quiltnotes.com, you have two choices of quilt layouts. The first is a straight set layout, where blocks are set block to block. You can choose to add up to 5 borders and sashing and cornerstones if you like. The second choice is to set your blocks on point, with or without borders, sashing, or cornerstones. The results for each of these calculators will give you the quilt size and number of blocks needed. You'll also have yardage requirements for backing, binding, as well as any sashing, cornerstones, and borders included in your design. The on-point layout results will also include fabric requirements for the side and corner setting triangles as well. Here's an example of a straight set quilt using 30 blocks. Blocks are set 5 across and 6 down, and there's 1 border. Later, when we're finding fabric requirements for the blocks, we'll need to know the number of blocks used and the block size. This quilt is also a straight set using 30 blocks set 5 across and 6 down, but this quilt has sashing and cornerstones as well as a border. Same number of blocks as the previous quilt, but this version includes sashing and cornerstones. In our last example, we have the blocks set on point. Once you know the block size and the number of blocks you'll need, it's time to find the fabric for them. In quiltnotes.com, under the Blocks tab, you will see this page. Here you see some common units used to build a quilt block. These common units make it faster and easier for you to find the yardage you need for your blocks. So let's get started. The home page for quiltnotes.com. This is the Calculators button or tab. Here is what you click for the straight set quilt and the on point set quilt. This is what we discussed before. And just as an example, this shows a 12-inch block, 12-inch wide and 12-inch high. We have 2 blocks across and 3 down. We also have a sashing and cornerstones, and we have 5 borders. You'll see the quilt size is listed here. And I'm going to change this and zero out all of the borders. You either need to have a number in these fields or a 0, or you will get an error. So now the quilt is quite a bit smaller, 30 inches by 44 inches, and let's go ahead and take the sashing off. Let's say we want a quilt about 50 by 60. So I put 5 blocks across and I have a 60-inch width. So I'm going to take one down and have 48-inch width. Now let's add some rows at the bottom. And now I have a 48 by 60-inch quilt. So I'll have a total of 20 blocks. When I'm happy with this layout, you'll click Submit, and it gives you all the fabric you need for whatever quilt you have designed. In this case, our block size is 12 by 12, the setting 4 across 5 down, the quilt size 48 by 60, and the number of blocks is 20. And this is what you'll need to know when we go to the next part where we're doing the fabric calculations. And here it gives you binding fabric, tells you how much you need and how many strips to cut. And here's the backing fabric. It gives it to you in 45 inches wide and 108 inches wide. If we had included a sashing or borders, those fabric requirements would be here. You can right-click and print this if you like, or just copy down the numbers. But for our demo today, we're going to use 20 blocks at 12-inch finished. So let's close this out and close this out. And the blocks is where we're going to find the common units. So here they are. And if we click on one, this is the square and rectangle, we'll put the number of patches we need. So if we need 5 squares with the finished size of 4 inches wide and 4 inches long, and you click calculate, it gives you the fabric you need and how you need to cut it. If you are using AccuQuilt, these are the dies that you can use to get this size square. So all of those common units are about the same thing. You enter the number you need, and in some cases the size you need as well. So we'll come back to this. What I want you to do now is go over to QUILTnotes.com and click on the charts button. Here you'll see a fraction to decimal chart. It'll always be here if you need to convert your fractions to a decimal. And we're going to use this grid section later on. If you'll go to the fabric charts, and you'll see we have a fabric chart in PDF and a fabric chart in Excel. You can download each of these, and I'll be using the Excel file today, but let me download the PDF and show you what it looks like. At the top, it has the fabric chart for AccuQuilt, and across here, this is where we'll put our units and all the information about the number of blocks and the number of units. For AccuQuilt, you can write your die numbers here, and these 6 sections are for 6 different fabrics, and we're going to write down our inches and yards that we need, and at the bottom we'll total them. This is what we'll fill out later on. Then at the bottom or the second page, it's for rotary cutting. It's basically the same chart, only you don't have a space for your dies. Okay, so download that and use either the PDF format or the Excel spreadsheet. All right, I got rid of the annoying mouse click sound. I didn't realize that was happening, so we won't have that anymore for the rest of this video. We're going to look at this block, and the first thing I do when I think about how to piece a block is to think about the piecing. So I look at this corner unit, and it's a 4-patch. So I'm going to draw a line around it. And I'm going to look around the block to see if I find any more 4 patches. Well, we have 1 in each corner, so that makes 4. And we have 1 in the center. So in this block, we have 5 4-patch units. So I'm going to my fabric cutting chart for rotary cutting. And across the top, we have just basic information about the block. So I'm going to fill in the block name, and I'll just call this block. And the number of blocks. Remember when we looked at the straight set layout, we said we were going to use 20 blocks. So I'm going to put 20 in here. The grid size, we're going to look at this to find the grid size. And you can see I have this unit, 4-patch unit, then we have a triangle and square unit, and another 4-patch unit. So we have 3 units across and 3 units down. Or I should say we have 3 grid spaces across and 3 down. So this is a 3x3 grid. Let's put 3x3. And the block size, we said also we were going to do 12 inches. But we don't have to pick 12 inches. I just picked that randomly. If we go now to Quilt Notes, because we need to find the grid unit size. We need to find out if this is a 12-inch block and it's a 3x3 grid, how big is this 4-patch unit and how big is this triangle and square unit? So we'll go to Quilt Notes and click on Charts. And this is the Select Grid and Block Finished Size chart. So I'm going to first choose my grid, It's a 3x3 grid. Now we choose our block size. And for this one, we're choosing the 12-inch size, but you can choose any other size you like that's listed on here. The sizes listed on here are the ones most often used for a 3x3 grid. So let's just for kicks choose 9-inch block. So if we choose a 9-inch block, the grid unit size is 3 inches. What that means is this is a 3-inch finished 4-patch unit, and this is a 3-inch finished triangle and square unit. So all the other units in these grid spaces are all 3-inch finished if this is a 9-inch finished block. But we want a 12-inch block. So let's go back over here and we'll click on our 12-inch block. So now our grid size is 4 inches. So this is a 4-inch finished 4-patch, and this is a 4-inch finished triangle and square. So we'll go back to our chart, and for the grid unit size, we're going to put 4 inches. And remember, these are all finished sizes we're dealing with here. Now we're going to look at this first section here, and we're going to fill out all the information for the 4-patch units. First, we'll look at our unit size, and we know from our grid unit size up here, it's 4 inches. So I'll put 4 inches here. And this unit is the 4-patch. Put that in there. And how many units, how many 4-patch units are in this one block? Well, we know there are 5. There's 4, there's 1 in each corner, plus 1 in the center. So we'll put 5 here. Now, we want to know for this column, how many of these 4-patch units are in the entire quilt. We have 5 per block, and we have 20 blocks. So 20 times 5 is 100. We'll need to make 100 4-patch units for this quilt. Now up here, these spaces up here are for 6 different fabrics. So the first one, I'm going to put the background. And the second one, I'm going to put the accent fabric. Now you can put anything you want here. If you know the fabrics you're going to use, you can put those up here. Or you could put light for the background and dark for the accent. If you're doing a scrap quilt, you'll want to know how many light fabrics and how many dark fabrics you need. So let's look now at the 4-patch unit. We'll need 100 4-patch units that are 4-inch finished. So now we'll go back to Quilt Notes. We'll go to our Blocks tab, and these are our common units, and we're going to find our 4-patch unit. So let's move this down here so I can see again. So 100 total at 4-inch finished. So the number of units we need is 100. The finished size is 4 inches. And then we press the calculate button. This gives us for patch A, which is all the squares are the same size, and we're using 2 different fabrics. So for the background fabric, we'll need 45 inches or 1.25 yards. So let's go up here to our background fabric. We'll put in 45 inches and 1.25 yards. And so let's go back to our 4-patch over here, and we'll see the accent fabric is the same as the background fabric. Now, since these patches in this 4-patch unit are the same size and the same shape, we can put all this information on the same line. So for the background fabric, it's 45 inches or 1.25 yards, and the accent fabric will be the same thing. 45 inches, 1.25 yards. So now let's look at the cutting instructions. It says to cut 15 strips at 2.5 inches times the width of fabric. So 15 strips at 2.5 inches times the width of fabric. Let me get this back over here. It's easier to do if you're just writing on this or if you're doing this yourself at home. Okay, so now you'll see that for these 4 patch units, we just have 2 fabrics, and we have the amount needed for the background fabric and the amount needed for the accent fabric. If I were piecing these 4 patch units, I would use strip piecing. So you can look at these number of strips and simply cut your 15 strips of background and your 15 strips of accent fabric. Stitch them together and do your strip piecing, and you'll subcut your 2.5 inch segments and then sew together your 4 patch units. But we're going to put in the rest of the information on the cutting. Here it says to subcut 200 squares. So we can put that right here. 200 squares or 200 segments. The segments are if you're using your strip piecing. So if I've lost some of you, let me just draw something out here. If you're doing your strip piecing, you have 2 strips that you sew together. This is a dark fabric and this is the light fabric. Once you sew those together and you press the seam, you're going to cut your segments. So into 2.5 inch segments. So then you'll have 2 squares sewn together. You'll have one of these and one of these. Then you'll sew 2 of them together to make your 100 4 patch units. Okay? One thing I wanted to point out to you is the amount of strips. And remember, these strips are for each. You need 15 strips of the background and 15 strips of the accent fabric. And this doesn't mean you have to always use 2 fabrics. So if I had 5 different background fabrics, I would cut 3 strips from each of the 5 background fabrics. And if I had 5 or 10, however many accent fabric strips you have, just make sure they total to 15. And that's the way you can get your scrappy quilts, or you can get your color coordinated quilts that way, just dividing out the total number of strips you need into the kinds of different fabrics that you have. For those of you using AccuQuilt, everything we have done so far is exactly the same. I've taken the numbers from the Rotary cutting chart. See, I'm in the AccuQuilt cutting chart or fabric chart right now. I've transferred over everything, the block name, 20 blocks, 3x3 grid, 12-inch block, 4-inch grid unit size. Everything is the same. We still need 4-inch finished 4 patches. There's still 5 in the block, and we still need 100 for our quilt. So we'll go look over here, and we have our results for our 100 4-patch units. What you'll look at now is this column here for AccuQuilt dies. You have a choice of making patches, just cutting squares, and you have a choice of these 3 dies. So you could choose one of these dies if you like, if you want to just cut squares and sew them all together. Or you can choose these 2 strip cutters and use one to make your strips. Everything is the same. The fabric will probably be a little bit different. We'll still need 15 strips at 2.5 inches, and we'll still need to have 200 squares of each. So if we choose one of our dies, let's just choose the 8-inch cube, and we click on this. And we're cutting squares, so we need 200 squares. And so we'll put the number of squares as 200 and press calculate. It gives you the inches you need, the number of strips you need to cut, and the size strip to cut, and how to fan fold the segments to cut your 200 squares. So you'll go to your chart and you'll cut. In here you'll put the die number, and it's 55709 or whichever die you've chosen. and we need 39 inches or 1.08 yards. And we'll put those numbers in. Here it says to cut 7 strips at 5.5 inches times the width of fabric. So we'll put that in here. 7 strips at 5.5 inches. 5.5 times the width of fabric. And you're going to fan fold 5.5 inch segments for a total of 200 squares. And however you want to write in here is up to you. Okay, that's a little bit better. You'll fan fold 5.5 inch size segments and you'll place that on the die and you'll cut 200 squares. Remember, you can cut up to 6 layers of fabric. Everything is the same as we did for rotary cutting up to this point. Now, if you wanted to let's go back to the 4-patch unit. If you wanted to use your strip cutter, you know you need 15 strips. You'll click on the strip cutter you want to use and just enter 15 strips and press calculate. It gives you the fabric, how many strips to cut, and how to fan fold. If you choose to use the strip cutter or the square cutter, whatever one you choose, write that die number here and write your instructions for that die. Because sometimes you might be choosing a square die that only cuts 4 at a time, so your strips will be smaller than if you used a die that cuts 9 at a time. Your strips will be quite wide for that one. So pay attention to which die you're using and be sure you put the right one here and the right instructions for cutting. So I didn't put here the background fabric and the accent fabric. So I'll copy these numbers over because it will be the same thing. You're cutting the same shape and the same size with the same cutter. Now let's move on to the triangle and square unit. Before we get into the triangle and square unit, I wanted to show you how the calculator works. You'll put the total number of units you need. Let's just say we need 10 and we want 3-inch finished. Here are your results. I'm basing the calculations on using the Tri-Rex ruler set for rotary cutting. But you can use any other similar tool to do the same thing. You're cutting the same shapes and the same size most often, but this is the ruler I'm familiar with and I've used for decades. It's really good, but there are other good products out there. So you can use the same amount of fabric for your rotary cutting with these rulers or some other ruler you have. You should have enough fabric, but you should always do a test block. So here are the results for the triangle and square unit. You see this section is for the triangle centers, and you notice I didn't call them light or dark. So that is this V here in the center, and here are the results for the triangle sides, and that's these parts here. Sometimes the sides will be dark, sometimes they'll be light, and the same with the center triangle. So that's why I have them separated out. The AccuQuilt dies here will give you one for the center triangle and one for the sides. So let's close that out and go back. And now I'm back on my rotary cutting chart, and we're going to fill in what we need for these triangle and square units. I'm going to put 4-inch finished because the unit is 4-inch finished, and I'm going to abbreviate this TIS for triangle and square and center. This is the center triangle. They're different fabrics and they're different shapes. So we'll put the center on one line and the sides on the other line. And so how many of these units are in the block? We have 4 in each block. We have 20 blocks, so 20 times 4 is 80. We'll be cutting 80 triangle centers. And we'll do the same thing for the sides. 4-inch finished, triangle and square, sides. We'll have 4 pairs. That's a little bit different because we're going to be cutting a left and a right side. This left side and right side, we'll be cutting those at the same time. And we'll also need 80 of those. Okay, so I'll transfer the same numbers over to the AccuQuilt side after we finish the rotary cutting side. So let's go to our triangle and square. And let's click on this. So we need 80 units and we need 4-inch finished. And we calculate. So for this, the centers, so for the triangle centers, our centers are dark fabric, the accent fabric. So I'll put these numbers first in the accent fabric column. So we have 35 inches or 0.97 yards. That's for the accent fabric, which are the triangle centers, these here. Now we have the triangle sides, and we'll put 35 inches down here for the background and 0.97 yards. I just realized that they're saying amount of fabric. I've never actually realized that before. So from the triangle centers, we'll cut 7 strips at 4.5 inches. So we'll put 7 here and 4.5 here times the width of fabric. Now the subcut for the centers, we're going to use the try tool at the 4.5 inch mark. So I'm going to take this out, use try tool at 4.5 inches and cut 80 because we need a total of 80 of these squares. So this is just your information as you're cutting instructions. For the triangle sides, we'll need 7 strips at 4.5 inches. So we'll put 7, 4.5, and let's take this out, subcut. We're going to use the Rex tool at 4.5 inches and cut 80 pairs. I'll just put in here, you're going to fold the fabric right sides together. And you might want to put that somewhere here. RST, right sides together. Or whatever kind of notes you need to make for yourself. Okay? And for the AccuQuilt dies, let's get off here. Let's go to our AccuQuilt. On the AccuQuilt side, I have transferred over all the information that's the same. And now we'll click on here. So this is for the center for that die, and we know we need 80. So we'll put 80 there and press calculate. So we'll need 50 inches. And the center is the accent fabric. So we'll need 50 inches and 1.39 yards. And this die is number 55753. Okay, so we'll cut 10 strips. Not 20, 10 times 5 inches. We'll cut 10 strips at 5 inches, and we're going to fan fold into 5-inch widths. And cut. $80 triangles. I'll put 80 shapes. 80 triangles. Okay, now we'll close this out. Go back to our sides, and it's 55754. And we'll put 80 pairs. So we'll need 21 inches. 1 inches or 0.58 yards of the background fabric. We'll cut 6 strips. 6 times at 3.5 inches times the width of fabric. Fold fabric wrong sides together. Then fold 5.25 inch segments. I'm going to shorten this. For 80 pairs. So that's how the totals for AccuQuilt. Now we've done all of our units in this block. We just have the 2 units. We'll go over again to the rotary cutting chart and go down to the bottom. So for the background fabric we need, and for the accent fabric, it's the same amount of fabric. 80 inches are 2.22 yards for each, and that's about 2.25 yards. Let's go over to AccuQuilt and let's sum this up. And so for AccuQuilt we'll need 60 inches of the background fabric, or 1.66 yards, so that's about 1.75 yards. And for the accent fabrics we'll need 89 inches, or about 2.5 yards. That's it. That's how you find your fabric requirements for per unit in each block and for the number of blocks you need for your quilt. I have been using the Quilt Notes ad-free experience. I have registered, and when I register, and if you pay $20, a one-time fee of $20, you'll have an ad-free experience of your own. You'll also have access to your home page where you can have a wish list of some rotary cutting tools and your AccuQuilt dies. And you can also have a collection. These are your rotary cutting tools in your collection at home or in your studio. And here is your AccuQuilt die collection you can keep track of as part of a member of Quilt Notes. It's a one-time fee of $20. You pay it and you're in. For as long as I own and control this website, there will be no other fee for membership. Also, you can click here to join our newsletter. It used to come out every week, but now it comes out a little less often because I've been so busy working on the website. But whenever I have new information, I'll send you a newsletter, and it's really never more than once a week. I hope you'll be able to find fabric requirements for any block you want, and I'll be doing more blocks, and I'm going to streamline it a little bit so we can just get right to the blocks and the units and fill out the sheet and be on with it. So thank you so much for watching.